Hi there, we're delighted this week to have Juliette Lloyd, the former pastor at Stanmore Road Baptist Church, sharing with us. And the reading is from Colossians chapter 1, verses 9 to 20. For this reason, since the day we heard about you, we've not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father who's qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of his Son, the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he's the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross.
Over these last few months of lockdown, I've been struck by the power of certain words or visual images in the public consciousness. In fact, even the word lockdown is a powerful image, isn't it? The idea of being shut in as a prisoner, your way barred, almost as if someone's holding your arms down by your side. And I know that this has been hard for many people, especially those living alone or who particularly miss the physical sense of touch. I saw an old friend in the park the other day for an appropriately socially distanced walk, and found myself absent-mindedly going in for a warm hug of greeting. Stopped, I have to say, just in time by a warning gesture. I suppose the pandemic produced its own first slogan, I can't breathe. The distressing expressed response of so many COVID sufferers. Then came the second version of I can't breathe, this time from a black man. The anguished cry for help and plea for release from a stifling, oppressive stranglehold by policemen in the USA, one of whom was kneeling on George Floyd's neck as he lay face down on the ground. George died as a result. The chance to breathe freely denied him. Then came the protest marches, black and white, old and young, taking up the same words. But now others added, Black Lives Matter, because it had come to mean more. Now it referred to those denied the chance to go about their daily lives with the same freedom as others. And those protests have continued to this day in all parts of the globe. And that in turn became allied to another strong image, taking the knee, as it's called. Since then, countless occasions in a wide variety of arenas, from Parliament to Public Square, Shopping Street to Sports Stadium, have been halted for a few moments of silence as people drop to one knee, bow their heads, and some also raising one hand in a silent salute of solidarity with those denied fair access to dignity, justice, or equality because of the colour of their skin. Now, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who was unwilling to join in, supposing it to be a motif derived from Game of Thrones, perceived it as more of a sign of subordination and subjugation than emancipation and liberation, he said. He said he would only kneel for the Queen or to propose to his wife. Now, I'm presuming he was not necessarily implying that either subordination or subjugation to either of those was intended, but still, that's not to say that he doesn't serve someone, whether he acknowledges it or even realises it at all. Taking the knee to someone or something isn't new, of course. A photo shows Martin Luther King and his followers taking the knee in prayer before the Selma protest march. Others took on that position, mimicking the stance of the figure in the anti-slavery statue that pleads, "Am I not a man and your brother?" as a way of showing solidarity with those denied rights as black people. And people have taken the knee before lords and kings, political, military and religious leaders for centuries. But it does beg the question, even if you chose to never make this gesture yourself, who or what do you really take the knee to? It's been a blind spot throughout mankind's history, even amongst God's own people, trying to decide what's important, who's in charge, which side's up, who it needs to please, and where its centre of gravity is, the source of its peace and contentment. Tell me, have you ever tried listening to the story of the Israelites just as a story, or even just bits of it, or an overview like you get offered now and again from Moses or Peter on the day of Pentecost or Stephen in Acts? Do you sometimes think of the characters in the retelling, well, that was a mean or an unwise thing to do. That didn't turn out well. Why did they choose to do that? Wasn't it supposed to be a story of people that had taken the knee to God, declared allegiance to him? But what happens when you take the knee to something else at the same time? I'd like to think of a few things, a few situations, or a few ways we might take the knee and suggest them to you and see if you recognise any from then or now. The first one, taking the knee to individualism and independence. This says, well, that might be all right for you, but I'm my own man or my own woman, and the rules don't apply to me. I'm self-made, self-reliant, and I decide my own destiny, as if I had control of it all and all parts of my environment, which of course I don't. This sort of taking the knee means that at times I'm unteachable. For instance, when King Jehoshaphat of Judah asked King Ahab of Israel, "Haven't you got a prophet of the Lord we can inquire about the next step from?" Ahab replies, "Well, there is one, but I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me, only bad things." Or another example. "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" the people said to Moses, who was the very one who had been sent by God as their rescuer. And yet the next moment, when things got awkward for them, or they had to wait for a while, they seemed quite willing to create other physical idols to put in the place of God and claim that these idols had affected their rescue. Interestingly, in the New Testament, when Stephen gives his defence to the Sanhedrin, he also suggests that they have been showing that same attitude towards Jesus, who would also come as their rescuer. And repeatedly, in the book of Judges, you get the line, "Everybody did what was right in his own eyes, and the nation slid into chaos." This wasn't individuality, but the selfish acting out of truly amoral behaviours that showed no comprehension of loving relationship with or responsibility to each other, or any sense of inherent dignity or true value of mankind. If I take the knee to this as well, I am naturally ungrateful. I mean, who would I be grateful to? I mean, didn't I provide it all? I sorted out things that needed sorting. And strangely enough, even those who say that they have trusted God often seem to manipulate things because well, they didn't quite think he quite realised all the complications in their particular case. The strange thing is, when things go wrong, why are we surprised? And more to the point, who do we blame? Well, it must have been somebody else's fault. Well, maybe it was God's. Do we recognise any of this? Secondly, there's taking the knee to what other people think of me. This will either make you take unwise steps or prevent you from taking steps you should take. King Saul had a bit of a problem with this one. He even seemed reluctant to step up to the mark, showing himself as king in the first place. I wonder, was he concerned about who he'd be representing? You know what it's like when you first go to secondary school or to college or even work. I wonder, did you scan the place to see who else was there and try to get a feel for who were the cool people, the best ones with whom to hang around, and therefore what it might say about you? I would imagine Saul would have had an eye to that kind of behaviour. And as king, he was constantly filled with jealous rages when he perceived David achieving a better press than him, irrespective of the fact that they were actually after the same goal. Decisions he made were rashly taken and doggedly stuck to, even when they were clearly unwise and against instruction or advice and hurting others. Why? For fear of losing face or appearing weak in public. He can't wait for God's go-ahead on decisions he makes because, well, he's scared he's going to lose his popularity, lose his army. David, on the other hand, well, he is due to be his successor, and he already knows that he's been appointed for future rule, and he's already earned a great popularity rating, and he's there being freely offered several opportunities for a touch of revenge action, or to slip in quickly, fast-tracking his rise to power, and yet he doesn't take it. Now, I'm not saying that David doesn't have his problems, but he's not being driven by other people's opinions. That isn't his problem, but it is Saul's. Those driven by other people's opinions often make rash decisions, but they also fear to do things they ought to do in case they become unpopular. You see, faced with that kind of challenge, shall I do? What will people think? You have to decide whose voice you will listen to, because you simply can't listen to both. The apostles, when commanded to stop teaching about Jesus, answered, which is right in God's eyes, to listen to you or to him? As for us, we can't help speaking about what we've seen or heard. Nobody can serve two masters, taught Jesus. Either he'll love the one and hate the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. Whose approval is entirely necessary and whose isn't? Whose opinion is most trustworthy and helpful? Knowing the difference between the two will affect your whole outlook on life and your actions, and probably your judgmental attitude to other people too. Whose servant, whose worker, whose ambassador, whose citizen are you? That is surely the one that you are answerable to. Equally, who is that other person answerable to? Certainly not you. Thirdly, taking the knee to fear or false security. I know it's a strange thing to bring up at the moment when we're all feeling pretty risk averse in the light of COVID, and I'm not advocating that we should live carelessly. But I am referring to an attitude of mind and heart that betrays a distinct lack of trust in a caring, compassionate, sustaining God. Are you amazed with me by how much the Israelite history seems to be consisting of leaders looking for alliances, most of which are not well matched or like-minded, almost as if declaring, God is good, as far as he goes, but it's not quite enough. Even Solomon, for all his wisdom, forged a multitude of relationships, be they wives, concubines, or alliances with leaders of other nations, all of which needed sweetening, shall we say, such that consciences were dulled and many practices not in line with God's ways became acceptable in the nation. Are we so different in our lives today? What alliances do we add to our faith just to make sure we've covered all the bases? The question is, what subscriptions are these alliances asking for? What return favours? And did you realise that God was already aware of all your needs? Why do you worry? Which of you by worrying can even add an hour to his life? Look at the lilies of the field. They neither work or spin and are here today and tomorrow thrown in the fire. But even Solomon in all his splendour was not dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown in the fire, will he not much more clothe you, ye of little faith? The thing about taking the knee is that you want to be as sure as possible that the one you entrust your life and your future to, be it yourself, someone else, or some other powerful alliance, is of good virtue, motivated to your good and not your harm, has the will to act in your favour and the resources to achieve those purposes. But how do you know that? Moses encouraged the Israelites to look back at their life experiences thus far. The Lord your God, he said, who is going before you, will fight for you, as he did in Egypt, before your very eyes, and in the wilderness. There you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a father carries his son, all the way you went until you reached this place. Paul points the Colossians to Jesus Christ as the one in whom God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell. And we have witnesses to tell of what his character was like. He has the desire and the power to reconcile to himself all things by making peace through his self-sacrificial love. And his cross and resurrection prove that. That is commitment. Someone worth taking the knee to. I'm put in mind of a chandelier. You know the type. Beautiful crystal cascading down in clusters from a central suspension point. Yes, we've all seen that episode of Only Fools and Horses. But I want you to imagine that this chandelier has been lassoed from all sides by ropes with grappling hooks, tangling up the cascades and pulling it entirely out of shape. Now the cascades won't work. Each crowds the other and the light can't get in between them. The crystals knock against each other and damage vulnerable edges. And the carefully designed lines of distribution of weight are disrupted, such that insupportable stress is being placed on some vulnerable points, whilst others rest idly. It's not good for the chandelier. It was not made that way. It could be so much better if only someone would decide which was the central point of suspension, the one sure, reliable source of connection. And being sure that that connection remained intact, they took a large pair of shears and cut through each of the other ropes, freeing the cascades to fall back and take the shape for which they were designed. Each crystal now in relationship with each other, but none causing damage. The light now accessible to dance off those beautiful facets with their unique individuality. Now, wouldn't that be a sight for sore eyes?